Hi, I'm James Patterson and welcome to this Photoshop tutorial. We're going to be taking an in-depth look at layers. Now there are lots of great things about Photoshop, but for me the number one top of the list is the ability to work with layers and the controls and features they give you. I'm going to be showing you the nuts and bolts behind this image, which is a combination of layers, text, adjustments and texture. So it covers a lot of the features of the layers panel. Let's start by opening up our layers background JPEG into Photoshop. So you can see I have a nice but fairly plain landscape here. This is going to be the basis for all the other elements that we're going to pile on top of it. So I'm going to start by adding a fort to the top of the hill here. Let's go back into Bridge and grab my fort JPEG. So I want to create a selection around the sky here so I can isolate the land because I only want the kind of ruined section on top of the hill here. So I'm going to start by grabbing my Magic Wand tool from the toolbar. Here we go, and with tolerance set to around 15, I'm just going to click around the sky here. If I hold Shift, you see that brings up a little plus sign by my icon. Then I can continue to add to my selection, just like this. So that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to feather my selection, which will make the transition around the edge of the selection a little bit less harsh. We'll soften it slightly. So I'm going to bring up my feathering by pressing Shift and F6, and let's feather it by 3 pixels. I'll OK that. So at the moment I have the sky selected, and I'd like to select the land. So if I press Command or Control, Shift and I, that will invert my selection, and you can see now I have the land selected. I want to just refine my selection a little bit. I'm going to do this by going into Refine Edge, which is up here in my options bar. And you can see I have various options here. I'm going to tick Smart Radius and just bring the radius up to about 1.5. Somewhere around there looks good. And just bring the smoothing up slightly. Let's also maybe feather it slightly more, maybe 1 more pixel. So you can see that gives me a bit of a smoother transition around the edges if I zoom in a little bit. I can also paint with my Refine Edge tool to really make a precise selection around areas like this where you see it selected the sky a little bit around the edge of this bush here. So I'm going to go into my Refine Radius tool here and just paint around the edges here. It takes a little bit of trial and error with the Refine Edge options. So you can see that's done a really good job of just selecting the bush and isolating it from the sky. So I'm going to go to OK because I'm quite happy with that. Then let's just zoom out by pressing Command or Control and minus. And I'm going to now bring this land into my other image. So I'm going to do that by just clicking on my Move tool over here in the toolbar. And let's click inside my selection, and I'm simply going to drag it up towards my layer background here and then down into the image, and you can see that's plonked it right on top of my background. First thing I'm going to do is rename my layer, so I can do that by going into my layers panel here. If your layers panel isn't visible, you can find it by going to Window and Layers, and then I'm going to double click on the word layer 1 and let's call it Fort. Okay, and you can see my fort isn't in the right place, so I'm going to move it and resize it using my Move tool. So let's click on my Move tool here in the options bar, in the toolbar, sorry. Then I'm going to go into my options bar and I have Auto Select and Show Transform controls. I want to tick both those boxes there. Then I can zoom out by pressing Command or Control and minus, and you can see I've found the edges of my fort layer. I'm going to resize my fort by holding Shift and dragging on the corner of my bounding box there. Holding Shift makes the transformation stay in proportion, so it's not going to squeeze the layer. So let's just get this fort positioned kind of on top of this hill. I'll zoom in a little bit by pressing Command or Control and plus, and we'll just try and match the contours of the hill with our fort, something like that. Then I'm double clicking to apply that transformation. Next I want to add a layer mask to my fort. So I'm going to go into my layers panel and click on the icon here. Let's click on my fort layer to make that active, and I'll click on my icon here to add a layer mask. Now with layer mask, black will hide parts of the layer and white will reveal. So you can see at the moment my layer mask thumbnail here is completely white, which means everything on that layer is being revealed. It's all visible. I can then paint with black on my mask to hide parts of that layer. I'm going to do that by simply grabbing my brush tool over here in the toolbar, and with black as my foreground colour. If black isn't your foreground colour, press D to reset your colours, and then you can flick between your foreground and your background colour by pressing X. So you can see you can flip very quickly using X. So I want black as my foreground, then I'm simply going to use, I want to brush with a soft edge really, so let's choose a brush from my brush preset picker up here, and we'll move in a little bit. Then I can resize my brush using my bracket keys, left or right. Let's get a nice large brush there, and making sure that I have my layer mask active. You can see if I flick between the two, the box around the edge kind of gets highlighted. So I want to be working on my layer mask, and I'm simply going to paint with my brush tool to blend this area in like this. And then I think I've gone a bit too far over on the edge here. I want to bring back a bit of my fort layer, so I'm going to hit X to switch to white as my foreground colour and simply paint back in over here. Okay, I'm quite happy with that. So I'm just going to press Command or Control and 0 to zoom out, and you can see that my positioning is quite good, but I could do with just lowering the lightness of my layer. I'm going to do that by pressing Command or Control and M to bring up my curves, and just drag down on my curve like this so the fort matches the background. Let's press OK. Next I'm going to add a tower to my fort, so let's go back into Bridge, and I have an image here of a tower that will open up by double clicking on it. I want to just select my tower and get rid of everything else in the scene, so I'm going to grab my lasso tool over here in the toolbar and simply draw a rough selection around my tower, just like this. Then if I press Command or Control and J, and you can see in my layers panel that's copied my tower to a new layer. Then I'm going to click on my background layer and drag that to the trash can here to get rid of it. So I'm going to select and cut out my tower using exactly the same method as we did with the sky earlier with the magic wand tool. If I click on that and then just begin to select the background like this, just holding shift again to click around, we'll zoom in slightly. So just holding shift to add to my selection. So I'm going to pause the video just while I tidy this up slightly. And you can see I've added a little bit more to my selection. Now I'm going to go to Refine Edge again, just to refine my selection a little bit. If I press Command or Control, Shift and I, just to invert it again, so I have the tower selected rather than the sky. Then let's go to Refine Edge, and I'm going to click Smart Radius, bring my radius up, bring the smoothing up slightly and the feathering. And then where it says output, I'm going to click on layer mask. Let's OK that. And you can see it's masked all those areas that I wanted to get rid of. This way I can add to my layer mask if needs be. So I'm going to click on my layer mask and go to my brush tool, painting with black again to hide parts of this layer. Let's just zoom in, and I'm just going to get rid of the tree here where it's kind of coming into the edge of my tower. Don't need to be too accurate because the tower is going to be quite small in the scene. Okay, and I'm quite happy with that. So once again, I'm going to grab my move tool over here in the toolbar and simply click on my tower and drag it into my image. And then again, I'm going to simply resize using my move tool again and clicking on the bounding box there and dragging to resize while holding shift to constrain my proportions. Let's just hit return to apply that transformation, and I'm going to zoom in slightly, and let's position the tower up here somewhere. So that looks fairly good. And I'm just going to change the colour of my tower to help it blend in with the Fortalist a bit. Let's press Command or Control and B to bring up my colour balance, and we'll give it a little bit more cyan and some blue, just so it matches the rest of the kind of stonework around it. So we'll do 29 and 11, that looks good. And I'm going to paint on my layer mask again, just to blend it in where the tower meets the rest of the brick here. Let's grab my brush tool again and make sure I'm working on my layer mask. So let's click on my layer mask thumbnail and simply paint in around these edges. Let's press X, and then I can paint to hide those areas. So just so it blends in a little bit better. If I zoom out, that looks fairly good to me. So now I'm happy with my tower layer. I'm going to merge it with the fort layer beneath by pressing Command or Control and E. You can see it's come up with a message because both of my layers have masks on them. Let's press Apply, and you can see that's applied my layer mask. So just as if I were erasing the pixels, it's got rid of them. So now let's copy my fort layer by pressing Command or Control and J. This will give me a fort copy layer, which I'm going to rename as Fort Reflection. Then I'm going to click on the bounding box here in the corner. This will access my transform mode. And then if I right click and go to flip vertical, and I'm simply going to drag my reflection layer down until it sits in the right place. And then let's double click to apply that. And then to make my reflection look a little bit more realistic, I'm going to apply a motion blur filter. So let's go to Filter and Blur, and then down to Motion Blur. And I'm going to do a distance of 10 pixels. Let's OK that. You can see that's blurred that layer slightly. Then I'm going to lower the contrast and the brightness of my layer again. This time let's go to Image Adjustments, Brightness Contrast, and just going to bring the contrast right back and bring the brightness down a little bit so it sits in with the other reflections. Let's OK that, and I'm also going to add another layer mask to my reflection layer. Let's click on my layer mask icon and simply paint with black again, just to blur that transition in a little bit more. Okay, so I'm happy with my tower. Now I'm going to add the butterflies. Let's go back into Bridge. And I have a file here called butterflies cutout PSD. This is simply a file I've pre-prepared where I've cut out lots of different pictures of butterflies and placed them all on separate layers. You can see in my layers panel over here, I have butterflies all on different layers here. And I'm simply going to use this file to drag in my butterflies. Let's click on this one here and simply using my move tool again to drag in the file. Then I'm going to resize using my transform controls, clicking on my bounding box and holding shift, and I can reposition the butterflies like this. Let's go back to my cutout layer and drag in another butterfly. Let's resize again and rotate. And so I'm going to continue like this to build up all of my butterflies. I'll pause the video and get back to you when my butterflies are complete. Okay, so you can see I've added lots more butterflies and transformed them into this swirling pattern we have. I've also added one down here with a reflection. Next I'm going to add some mist to the surface of the water. You can see there's a little bit here, but we're going to add a bit more. I'm going to do that by first clicking on the Create New Layer icon here in the Layers panel, and we'll rename this layer as Mist. Then I'm going to go to Filter, Render, and Clouds. Let's zoom out slightly. Then let's go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, and we'll leave the radius around 60. Let's OK that, and then I'm going to go to my blend mode here in the layers panel, and we will choose lighten, and I'm also going to bring the opacity down to about 60. So I'm quite happy with that. I just want to mask the mist, so it's only affecting the middle area of the water here. I'm going to do that by adding another layer mask. This time if I hold Alt and click on my Add Layer Mask icon, this will give me a full layer mask that's hiding all of my fog layer. I can then use my brush tool and select white as my foreground colour and simply paint back in to reveal that fog. So I can use different opacities to bring it back in more gradually. And kind of give it a bit more of a kind of a random feel to it, something like that. You can see where my fog is kind of going over my butterflies here where I don't want it. I can sort that out simply by dragging the layer back in my layer stack so the butterflies sit in front. But I also want the mist to be affecting the butterflies closer to the background here. So I'm going to click on my butterflies layer and then create my layer mask again and simply paint with black on a low opacity, so bring the opacity down to about 20, and then paint with black on my mask so that these butterflies in the background gradually fade into the mist. So at this point I'm happy with all the elements we've brought in. I want to apply some universal texturing and adjustments just to make everything gel together a little bit better. So let's go back into Bridge, and I have my texture layer here that I'm going to open up and drag in using my move tool. Let's click on my texture and simply drag in to my image. We'll position it on top, and then I'm going to change the blend mode of this layer to soft light and also lower the opacity to about 25%. You can see if I toggle that layer on and off by clicking on the eye icon, it's just giving me a little bit more texture. So let's go ahead and rename that layer again. Now I'm going to add a couple of adjustments to my image using adjustment layers, which you can find by clicking on the icon here in the layers panel. Let's add a curves adjustment, and I'm simply going to draw an S-shaped curve just to give the image a bit more contrast. Secondly, I'm going to add a color balance adjustment layer. Let's bring the cyan in a little bit more, and maybe bring in a little bit more yellow as well. That looks good to me. Let's go ahead and add another adjustment layer. This time I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer and just bring the saturation down slightly just to dull the colors a little bit. I also want to darken the sky, so I'm going to add a second curves adjustment layer. Just drag down on my curve like this again. So I'm darkening the sky. Not too worried about the land because I'm going to mask that out now using a gradient. So I'm going to click on my gradient tool over here in the toolbar, then with black as my foreground color, make sure I'm working on my curves mask up here. I'm simply going to draw a line up towards the sky there, and you can see if I toggle that layer on and off how that is darkening down my sky. Now that curve is working on top of my butterflies here to darken them, which I don't really want. So I'm going to bring my curves layer back down in my layer stack. Let's just drag my layers out here and open them up slightly. So you can see if I drag my curves layer back down behind my butterflies, let's bring my layers back over here, and then you can see my curve is now only affecting the sky because I've put it behind the butterflies in my layer stack. Now I'm going to add some text. So let's go back up to the top of my layer stack because I want my text to sit on top of everything. And then if I click on my text tool over here, my horizontal type tool, and just click within the image. You can see I have various options up here to change the characteristics of my text. So I can change the font or the size here. Let's just type the, and then if I click off my text tool and then click back on it and type my second word, and click off it again, then click back on it and write my third word, click off my text tool again, and you can see that's added each word onto a separate layer here in my layers stack. Then let's just zoom in and resize those words. So this way I can position each word wherever I want it and resize them independently of each other because each is on a different layer. Just like so. Oh, you can see I haven't held shift and that's distorted that layer. So let's escape that and then resize again. Finally, I'm going to apply a layer style to my text just to give it a bit more impact. I'm going to do that by clicking on the layer style icon here in the layers panel, and let's select drop shadow. You can see that's given me a drop shadow. It's not quite the effect I'm after. I'm going to change the blend mode to normal, and let's choose a lighter color, something like that. Let's move my angle round so that it's coming in a different way, and we'll bring distance to 6 and size to about 6. Let's OK that, and you can see that's given me a nice drop shadow effect. I want to apply that to my other two words, so I can do that by clicking on the other word and then going back through the same layer style menu, or for a quick fix you can simply hold Command or Control and Alt and then click on where it says effects here, and then if I just drag that down to the layer below and then drag it down again, you can see that's quickly applied the same effect to all three text layers. So there we have it, my finished montage showing off lots of different elements of the layers panel. Let's go back through them very quickly. You can see I have my background and then my fort, then the reflection of my fort, my mist, and my curves layer that's working on the sky there. Let's just go up slightly. My butterflies, my texture layer, and my curves adjustment to add contrast, my color balance adjustment to bring in a bit more cyan and yellow, my saturation adjustment to dull down the colors slightly, and on top of everything, my 3 layers of text.